basically, I had nothing to do with Lehman until the week of, what was the week of? September 8, I think it was, Monday, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And it was late in that week, probably late on Wednesday, which would have been maybe that was the 8th of September. I think the week ended on the 12th, I'm sorry, so it would have been the 10th of September.
I think that's right, yes.
And that was just a call from a partner here who had a relationship with Lehman, who said that there had been a brief discussion about bankruptcy, but it was very confidential, and they just wanted some general information. And there may have been a call with the chief legal officer, but nothing significant was done on that Wednesday.
Okay.
On Thursday, the 9th, no, Thursday was the
11th.
11th, correct. On Thursday 11th, there was another call and just general information. And all we were doing, excuse me, was collecting public information about Lehman from its public filings. There was no intensive work being done on Thursday. On Friday, it intensified a bit because there were some concerns on the part of the Federal Reserve as to Lehman's liquidity.
And during this period, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, how many people did you tell inside your firm? How many other people knew that you'd even had this phone call?
Less than 10. In fact, we were basically instructed that this was very confidential and that the team could not be expanded without specific permission from Lehman.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So it wasn't a project that was deemed to be imminent.
Okay.
And then on Friday, I don't have swine flu.
Even if you did, we would continue.
Okay. But I do need a glass of water.
Yeah, would you like something?
Some water.
Okay.
There's some on the cart there and back further also.
The lower tier of the cart. You passed it. Oh, you got it, okay.
Thank you. Thanks. On Friday, we received a call that there was going to be a meeting at Lehman, which was going to be attended by some representatives of the Federal Reserve Bank. And the chief legal officer thought that might be a good time for myself to appear at the meeting. It was a meeting in the late afternoon. It was Friday. And generally, the subject of the meeting was to ascertain Lehman's liquidity and ability, I'm adding this, the ability to continue operating. So it was a number of people from Lehman's financial area, the chief financial officer and other people in the financial area, who were making a very informal presentation to, I think there were four people who came from the Federal Reserve, describing what had happened to Lehman during the week in respect of its liquidity.
And they came from the New York Fed?
New York Fed.
New York Fed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my recollection, and I hope I'm not demeaning anybody, I don't think they were very senior people. They looked young, in retrospect. And the chief financial officer was explaining that Lehman had been put under great pressure in liquidity because of requests, or you can call them demands, by various banks for additional collateral, primarily in the area of clearing transactions, and that the firm had been scouring its resources to be able to post the collateral with the Federal Reserve Bank, no, I'm sorry, with JP Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America. And that was creating a liquidity crisis. And because Lehman was a global institution with, as I said, thousands of trades going on all the time, the actual liquidity figures never come in until late in the evening or after midnight. This also came after the federal government had taken control of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, which occurred earlier in the first week of September, I believe, where both those firms were put under conservatorship. So the presentation was made. There were no final figures on the liquidity.
Was there any mention of shorting or other speculative attacks against Lehman, either by Goldman Sachs or by hedge funds?
No. There was a discussion about the collateral positions, as I stated. There was also a discussion about the firm being advised by the rating agencies that there was a probability of a downgrade. And if the downgrade occurred, Lehman would be required to post even more collateral. So the situation could get very serious.
Was there any mention of, I believe it was that day, that Friday, that JP Morgan seized, I believe it was over $8 billion of Lehman's cash?
No.
There was no mention of that?
No.
Okay.
Who told you that anyway?
Oh, it's an interesting story.
I've never heard it, frankly.
Oh, really?
Really.
Oh. It's known. I was told it by one very senior Lehman person and by another person I can't name, but a very, very senior person in the investment banking world.
I don't think it shows up in the records.
Might not. It was of dubious legality, and if
Where was it done?
I'm sorry.
Where was it done?
It was done by JP Morgan in New York, Friday afternoon.
I believe it's inaccurate.
Okay.
Okay?
Actually, some other time, it's, can I tell you? I should not tell you who told me this.
Well.
But anyway, let's proceed.
Okay.
Let's proceed.
So the meeting ended pretty much close to 5 o'clock. The Lehman people were very busy because they were in negotiations with Bank of America, and there were also negotiations with Barclays Capital going on. So many of the senior executives, and particularly in the finance area, were very, very busy as both of those firms were engaged in due diligence.
With regard to?
An acquisition.
Okay.
Purchasing Lehman. And I think that was the main focus of Lehman at that point in time.
Okay.
And then Saturday came.
Tell us about Saturday.
And well, actually Friday night I got a call from an attorney who represented the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, making an inquiry as to whether there were any preparations underway with respect to bankruptcy. And I got that call at home, and I said, just what I would call contingency planning, but no real preparation was underway except collecting information. And he said, well, maybe we should talk about this tomorrow. So we arranged to have a meeting Saturday morning here with representatives of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Here, meaning here at?
At Walgatchel.
Uh-huh.
And I believe some of the people who had been at the Friday afternoon meeting attended, and some additional people from the Federal Reserve Bank and the attorney, and we had just a general discussion as to the level of preparation, if any. And it was a very calm meeting, and in terms of preparing bankruptcy papers, our impression, when I say our impression, the firm's impression was that the Fed was basically indifferent to timing. And that meeting was maybe 2 hours. And then everybody went back to their cubby holes. We continued collecting information and trying to do a bare bones kind of a preparation. And there were a lot of conference calls on Saturday because the question was, would Bank of America acquire Lehman or would Barclays acquire Lehman? And the Barclays deal was getting more attention, I think, on Saturday afternoon. And that was about it on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Then on Sunday, it sort of intensified. The Fed contacted us, the attorney for the Fed, asking if we had accelerated the preparation. And we said, not really. It was going along at a very casual pace. And he, as I recall, he said something about, well, you may have to intensify that. And our answer was, well, you were indifferent yesterday. And he said, well, things may be changing. And then the whole team was here. The team had expanded by that time. It was now close to 15 people. And there were a lot of conversations going on. We had learned that Bank of America had apparently dropped out. In any event, it was radio silence. So there were discussions by telephone. We were here, the legal team, but we were in discussions with Lehman people by telephone. And then we were told that there
Excuse me, which Lehman people?
The chief legal officer, the president.
Bart McDade.
Bart McDade, yeah. Not in the calls I was on, Dick Fuller was not on those calls, but he may have been talking to other partners here. And we were advised that there was a meeting going on at the Fed Bank downtown in Manhattan, at which they were discussing Lehman and other related events. And there was a suggestion made that perhaps some of the Fed representatives ought to come up to Lehman. And they declined and said, if you want to, you can come down here. So a decision was made to go down to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York.
This is what time of day?
It was early afternoon.
Okay.
And 4 of us, myself, Steve Danhauser, who is the managing partner of the firm and the liaison partner, who was the liaison partner with Lehman, Tom Roberts, who was head of the corporate department, and Laurie Fife, who was a partner in business, finance, and restructuring. We all jumped into a yellow cab and went down to the Federal Reserve Bank. For some reason which I will never understand, the cab driver decided not to take the highway and go through Manhattan. So it took us a long time to get down there because he went through Greenwich Village, and there must have been a festival or something. It took forever to get through the village. And by the time we got down to the Fed, the entrance was closed because they were doing some construction, and we were instructed to go around to the garage. And the cab driver was very nervous about going around to the garage because there were a lot of guards standing outside. And the paparazzi were all over the place.
So there are lots of photographers?
Oh, all over the place.
I see.
There were I think there were rumors around the city that there were meetings going on at the Fed, not only relating to Lehman, but the general financial situation.
Mm-hmm.
And have you ever seen the Federal Reserve Bank downtown?
Actually, no.
It's built like an Italian fortress, heavy masonry. And the entrance to the garage has pylons in front of it. So when we told the cab driver to go into the garage, he said, I can't get in there. They have those pylons in the way. And we said, no, they'll take care of it. And sure enough, one of the guards pressed a button, and they go down into the ground. And then the door opens up. And he decided to back into the garage. I think it's the first time a yellow cab ever got into that garage. And he was petrified. And we got in, and we got out. And I noticed as we were going in, the CEO of Citibank was leaving. So there must have been a lot of meetings going on. And we were taken to a large conference room. And in that conference room, Bart McDade was in there, and 3 other Lehman officers. And they were having a discussion with a large group of government representatives. It included the Federal Reserve Bank, the U.S. Treasury, the SEC, and the Securities Investor Protection Corporation. There must have been, I would say, approximately 30 people on the other side of the table.
Okay.
And when we came in, Bart was talking about Lehman's liquidity. And the big subject was how liquidity had been drained out of the system over the past 2 weeks, basically, probably starting from around September 8th. Maybe what you referred to, the $8 billion, which I don't believe is reflected in the books and records. What had happened was J.P. Morgan was demanding more collateral. And it was demanding collateral to collateralize Lehman's guarantee of Lehman Brothers, Inc. Basically, J.P. Morgan was the clearing bank for Lehman Brothers, Inc., which was the broker-dealer.
Mm-hmm.
And Lehman Brothers, Inc. had always posted collateral for intraday loans and overnight loans. And J.P. Morgan had insisted upon a guarantee at some point in time, and now wanted the guarantee collateralized. So Lehman had, I think it was about $5 million in cash had been posted as collateral.
Million or billion?
Billion, I'm sorry. It's hard to get used to billions.
It's even harder to get used to trillions.
Well, what comes after trillions? That's the question. What's after trillions?
Quadrillions. We'll get there too, I'm sure.
Someday. And in addition to that, there were money market funds, which I think equaled about $6 billion, something in that area. And they were sure there's going to be a demand for more collateral as the market was sinking.
I was told, this is a digression, but with regard to this issue, I was told that that J.P. Morgan, yes, was asking for collateral, and that when Lehman hesitated to voluntarily provide it, J.P. Morgan physically seized the accounts that it held, the Lehman accounts it held on Friday. Not true?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
So there was a discussion, and Bart sort of finished his presentation. There was a question asked about the transactions with Bank of America and Barclays, and it was clear to everybody that Bank of America was out of the picture. And I don't remember exactly when Bank of America announced the Merrill deal. So the Barclays transaction, at that point in time, there was some optimism that the Barclays transaction might go forward. And either during that meeting, it became clear it wasn't going forward. That the FSA in the United Kingdom had questions about the transaction. There was a question of stockholder consent to the transaction on the Barclays side. And then there was a question about would the Treasury back up the transaction in the same manner that it backed up the Bear Stearns sale to J.P. Morgan.
U.S. Treasury.
U.S. Treasury, yes. And apparently U.S. Treasury had declined.
So how did you hear this? How did this come out?
There was general discussion about that, not in great detail. And the conclusion was that there was not going to be a Barclays acquisition of Lehman. And in that context, I think it was the representative of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the general counsel, who said they had concluded that there was only one alternative for Lehman. and that alternative was to commence a bankruptcy case. And they wanted the bankruptcy case commenced before midnight of September 14. And then we had what you could loosely describe as a debate as to why that was necessary. And there was colloquy back and forth about how did you arrive at this decision, why is it necessary, and the representatives of the various governmental authorities were quite rigid. And we kept pressing that this would be a terrible event. And at some point I used the word Armageddon, and they fully considered the consequences of what they were proposing, that the effect on the market would be extraordinary.
You said this?
Yes.
Okay.
And at some point in time, somebody on the other side said, well, we're not making much progress. But what we will do is we will caucus and consider all of your comments. And at that point in time, we said, since there were only 8 of us, I think, and there were over 30 on the other side, well, we'll go out and you can discuss it. And they said, no, no, no. We'll go out, and when we're finished, we'll be back. And they all got up and left. And we were in this big conference room, and a very distinguished-looking man came in, and we thought he was like a messenger to give the conclusion of that caucus. But he said no, he was just there to clean the table off, put the chairs back in place, which I thought was very interesting. And we were waiting, and time was passing, and I said to my partner, Tom Roberts, let's go take a walk around the building. Well, you're not allowed to walk around that building. And as soon as you get out of a particular area, guards appear. So we went out and we started walking down the hallway, and a guard said, where are you going? And we said, well, just for a stroll. And he said, you can't stroll in this building. You're confined to this area around the conference room. And as we walked around, we found a table with sandwiches. So Tom and I partook of the sandwiches, and we were standing around talking, and they were gone, I would say, for over an hour.
This is what time of day?
Oh, we were now into the early evening, 5, 6 o'clock, something around there. And finally, they all came back in. And Mr. Baxter, who's the general counsel, made a statement to the effect that we have considered all of the comments that you made in our discussion, and it has not changed our conclusion that Lehman must file a bankruptcy case by midnight tonight.
Was Tim Geithner present?
I did not see Mr. Geithner.
You didn't see Geithner?
No.
Okay.
There were a lot of people back there. I'm pretty sure he wasn't there.
Okay. Did they mention that they had consulted with him or not?
No.
Okay.
No. They just said they had considered all of the comments that we had made, and they were still of the belief that in order to calm the markets and move forward, it was necessary for Lehman to go into bankruptcy.
Calm the markets?
Yes. Well, we had asked a number of questions. What is the objective of filing a bankruptcy petition? What do you expect it to do? And their response was, we have a program, and we believe this program will calm the markets. So naturally we asked, what is the program? And generally the response was, well, we don't have to explain it to you. We have decided upon what is the appropriate program. And there was a lot of discussion about that. It went back and forth, words to the effect that, well, since we seem to be the linchpin to this whole thing, it would be nice to know what the program is. And
since the program involves sacrificing us.
that colloquy went back and forth for 15, 20 minutes.
Really? And
finally, the attorney who was representing the Federal Reserve Bank, the senior partner at Cleary Gottlieb, said, it's no use continuing this argument. We've told you the decision. And then we repeated, have you really considered the consequences? And their answer was yes. And then one of them, I can't remember who it was, did say that part of the program was a release of a series of public releases that they thought would have a very calming effect on the market. And if we tried to open the subject again about this is not a good thing to do, they said, please stop. And at one point they said, this is what Lehman has to do. Lehman has to call its board of directors together, and it has to pass a resolution to commence a bankruptcy case. And which I responded, and Lori Fife responded, we are not prepared to do that. And there is no way that we could file a bankruptcy petition for Lehman Brothers prior to midnight. That's impossible. And even after midnight, it would be what I would call at the meeting a skinny petition. It would be just bare bones. It would not have the usual first day motions that go with a bankruptcy petition. It would be unique and very different from anything that ever been done before. And they repeated, you should convene the board of directors and present the necessity of going into bankruptcy and the passing of a resolution. And I think somebody said, the cars are downstairs waiting to take you back to Lehman. There was no useful purpose in staying there, so we called Lehman and repeated what we had been instructed to do. The directors of Lehman were at the headquarters because a meeting had been scheduled to approve the Barclays transaction.
A meeting of the board of directors?
Yes. I think there was a board of directors meeting that was scheduled for around 1:30 or something like that. And it had been suspended because they were waiting to hear whether Barclays was going forward. So the directors were actually in the building. So we all got into our respective cars and went uptown. And by time Steve Danhauser, Lori Fife, Tom Roberts, and myself got to the building, which was really a sad spectacle to watch, because people were streaming in and out of the building, Lehman employees, with their suitcases, going into the building and picking up their personal belongings and or whatever else they could pick up, I guess, and leaving the building.
So they knew? How did they know?
Well, the media was all over the place saying that Lehman was on the verge or going or whatever. And people were nervous about whether they could get into the building the next day and get their personal belongings.
So information about this had already leaked out?
There was information, I don't know exactly, but there was information certainly that Lehman was an extremist. And it was a mob scene. I mean, it was just a steady stream of people going in and out. Very sad, with the roll-on luggage and people carrying envelopes under their arms and personal computers and stuff like that. So we went up to the boardroom. Bart McDade had already arrived, and he was giving a report on what happened at the Fed. And then we corroborated what he said, and there was a discussion at the board meeting, and Dick Folt's assistant came in, and she handed him a note. And he said, excuse me, I have a request here which is somewhat unusual. And he informed the board that Chris Cox, the chairman of the SEC, was calling and wanted to address the board. And the question was, should Mr. Cox be allowed to address the board? And it was a very short discussion. It said, what do we got to lose? So a telephone was set up on the board table, and Christopher Cox and Tom Baxter were introduced, and Mr. Cox made a presentation in which he basically said that this decision had been made, that it was necessary for the maintenance of an orderly market, that Lehman commence a bankruptcy petition, which was backed up by Mr. Baxter.
Mr. Baxter, again, is?
The General Counsel of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The directors began to ask questions as to why that decision had been made. And finally, one of the directors said, "Are you directing us to commence a bankruptcy case for Lehman Brothers, or directing the directors to vote for a resolution?" Words to that effect. And Mr. Cox and Mr. Baxter sort of hesitated, and finally said, "We're going to go and caucus." So they went on moot, and they were gone for 15 or more minutes. And then they came back and said something to the effect that the decision as to whether to file is really a decision in your discretion. We are just giving you information which we believe is in the interests of the financial markets, and that you should consider. And several directors persisted in saying, "Well, we don't understand that you're going to have to explain it in greater detail." And one director finally said, "I really want to know whether you are issuing a command or a direction," I can't remember. And again, they caucused. And they were gone for another 10 or 15 minutes. Christopher Cox came back, and he opened up by saying, "The decision to commence or file a bankruptcy is vested in the discretion of the board. You have to exercise your business judgment." It was sort of a very attorney-prepared kind of a statement.
Yeah, but it kind of bullshit, basically.
Well, you could say that.
Yeah.
And there was another question asked by a director, and I think it was, I can't remember whether it was Cox or Baxter who said, "We cannot command you or direct you, but we think that our preference was made very clear at the meeting, excuse me, at the meeting held earlier today at the Federal Reserve Bank." And then he said, "That's all we have to say," and they thanked him, and he got off the wire.
Now, during that conversation, was there any discussion of why, and actually prior to that at the meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, was there any discussion about why the Treasury, why the U.S. Treasury had decided not to support an acquisition by Barclays?
There had earlier been some discussion about moral hazard, and it was not the business of the government to bail out every entity that is in financial distress.
Who said that?
Unfortunately, I didn't have the names of all of the people, but it was a general comment, and it had been in the press the day before, the words moral hazard. And my recollection is that Mr. Paulson was not too happy about doing Bear Stearns, and he certainly is a free market enthusiast. So it was almost as if somebody had to be sacrificed, or something had to be sacrificed.
But they didn't say
Lehman
that.
drew the short stick.
They didn't say that, though, I assume.
No. No, they just said that this was, I'm paraphrasing, necessary for the stability of the marketplace.